Welcome to Off the Clock, the webcast of employment attorneys at Miller Johnson, where we discuss what is happening in the HR world and provide practical insight and advice. We are your co-hosts, Rebecca Strauss and Sarah Willey, two employment lawyers who spend their days guiding employers through all of the challenges that workplaces offer. Good morning, Rebecca.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I am fantastic today. How are you doing?
I am good.
Good.
We've had lots of people watching us and listening to us, right, which is very exciting.
It is exciting. Unnerving a bit, but also very exciting.
Yes, but we have more people watching than listening on a podcast. So let's take a moment and remind people that this is available as a podcast, right, which will allow people to do other things while they're listening to us.
Yes, good point. I am finding myself spending a lot more time in my car and around and about,
Yes.
driving places, driving kids places. So everyone in the audience, if you guys want to watch this as a webinar, that's fantastic. But at the same time, if your lives are getting busier as well, know you can find it on any of the podcast apps. So just search for Off the Clock, Miller Johnson. Download it, and we have all of the episodes are available on those podcast apps as well.
So convenient.
Good.
Right?
So what do you have going on this week, Rebecca?
Well, there's always a theme of the week, Sarah, right? And we talk about how we decide what our topic's going to be is what are the kinds of calls we're getting in a given week. But this week I want to talk about something we've been dealing with really a lot over the past year.
Okay.
And probably 4 years, and of course even before that. And that's conflicts in the workplace, differences of opinion on what I'll call hot button issues, right?
There's been a lot of those.
Right. This is not breaking news.
No.
This is nothing new. But certainly before the last election, right, people have very strong opinions and very strong support of one candidate or another. There's been lots of strong opinions about COVID and the appropriate response to COVID. There's been strong opinions about vaccinations. There's been strong opinions about race relations this past year.
Strong opinions.
Yeah, that's kind of
about lots of things, right?
The theme of the year, right? Not just the week. And we've been getting throughout the year, in fairness, not just this week, but throughout the year, lots of client questions, and clients are just find themselves in a difficult position sometimes, trying to balance all of it, struggling with their own opinions on things versus what is right for the organization to do or say, how to manage conflict as it arises between employees. What do you think about, let's just take the first question, which is what should employers do themselves, right? When there's a hot topic, a controversial issue out there.
Sure.
We've seen organizations make statements, for instance, one way or another. Do you see any liability, let's just say legal liability, to the organization for making a statement about a current hot topic?
Oh, gosh. You know who I think we should ask that question of?
Who?
I think we should see, because I just recently had a conversation with our colleague Nate Plantinga of this topic. And I know he has lots of thoughts and has been dealing with these questions and concerns as well. So maybe we should phone a friend. It's not to win $1 million, I'm sorry to say. But shall we see if Nate's available and phone a friend and talk to him about this?
Let's try it. We've never done that before.
All right.
On this podcast. So how do we even go about phoning a friend on this podcast? Because I would love to talk.
I'm right here. I'm right here.
Well, that's frightening, Nate. Nate? How did you do that?
I've been lurking on your podcast, just hoping that sometime you might ask me if I have anything at all to contribute. And this is like the greatest day ever.
Oh, my God.
Well, hi, Nate. How are you?
Nate, I just have to ask, do you do this when we're working in our offices, or is this just a podcast thing?
Not as far as you know.
Oh my God. Well, thank you, Nate. Thanks for joining us.
That reminds me, Sarah, for another episode, employee privacy. Nate, will
Yeah,
you
that
come
probably
back?
would be a good topic these days.
All right, Nate. Well, we know Sarah's right. You do deal with a lot of these issues and have thought through these things very carefully. So how do you approach this issue when there's a hot topic, a controversial issue in the world that's happening, and an employer is considering making a statement or taking a side, if you will? What types of things should they be thinking about in terms of, let's just start with liability. We are lawyers after all. So is there any potential for legal liability if they do something like that?
Yeah, and I mean, that's a very involved question, which I'm sure you intended. I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by liability, and then, what type of stand is the employer taking? So, if you're talking about legal liability, and the employer's stand is to itself support some political cause or some social cause, I don't see any obvious exposure for employers. I mean, unless that cause is overtly racist or sexist or the like. I mean, I don't think employers can hang a KKK banner in the break room and feel great about their legal chances.
Okay, so Nate, I'm going to interrupt you right there. We are not recommending KKK banners in the break room,
right?
Correct? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we're not recommending them in the break room or anywhere else.
Good caveat.
Let me be clear. What about, Nate? So what I've observed is that when employers ask about liability these days, in the past, it's been obvious to us, of course, that they meant, as you said, legal liability. And now that analysis has expanded really to other considerations, PR, social media, etc. Have you seen that as well? And if so, how are you helping clients manage those concerns?
Yeah, I definitely have seen that. And at the risk of avoiding the question for the moment, I do think we ought to wrap up the legal liability piece, because I agree with you that what you just asked is the more salient question. Right. And I think it's the question that people are wrestling with more. But there is legal liability in this space if the employer's stand is not to take some action itself or to engage in expression itself. Employers have free speech rights, and if they want to support a cause or endorse a candidate, they can do so. And whether employees like it or not, agree with it or not, their only real recourse, unless the employer's position is tied to a protected category or characteristic, their only real recourse is to go somewhere else, right? I mean, at-will employment goes both ways. But what if the employer's position is to prohibit expression? I mean, what if the employer's position is to say to employees, you can't talk about that here, you can't wear that here, you can't express that here? I do think there's some potential legal exposure there.
Tell us about that, because I think in a perfect world, many HR folks would love to be able to say, can you just come to work and do your job, right? And not be a human being, right? Not feel the need to express yourself, not cause controversy, not cause conflict, etc. So tell us more about that.
And we have, to be clear, we have seen some policies like that, right? Sure. Some employers, particularly before the last election, had very specific policies that said not to talk about politics, support for candidates, et cetera, right? The prophylactic approach, if you will, to stop the conversations from happening in the first place. So Nate, what do you think about policies like that?
Yeah, and that's where a lot of these legal challenges come in. And I mean, I couldn't agree with Sarah more. I mean, I think most employers have had enough with just ordinary workplace politics, right? Where, type A employees claw over one another on their way to the top. I mean, workplace politics is too much. I mean, so the politics of the workplace, employers would just as soon sit on the sidelines and just say, can't everyone just get along? And that's really the basis for the policies that you're talking about that lots of employers have, that just say, look, when you're here at work, we don't want you to wear anything, a button, a hat, a t-shirt that, has a political message or a religious message or even a controversial message, because we don't want a divided workplace. We don't want a place where people are going to fall into camps and glare at one another instead of focusing on whatever their job may be. And those policies generically are just fine. There's a common misnomer, I think, at least misunderstanding that some employees have, that, they have free speech rights and they ought to be able to, express themselves in whatever way they wish, including in the workplace. And that's not exactly right, unless you happen to work in the public sector, because, your constitutional right is against government interference with your speech. And so if you work for the state or federal government, then yeah, you absolutely have some recourse. But there's nothing in the Constitution that says private employers can't decide what they want or don't want. And once employees figure that out, the question is, okay, well, do we have any rights here? And right. Yeah. I think that tends to boil down, and you guys know this because you see it all the time, we deal with it all the time, there's always a huge difference between policy and enforcement.
Yeah, right.
And that's where the rubber meets the road, right? So can you have a policy that says, hey, when you're working here, we want you to have, no messaging of any kind that isn't directly related to our brand? Yes, you can do that. Can you say, we don't want any sort of political message of any kind? Sure, you can do that too. But then what about the exceptions that creep up over time, right, that everyone sees and everyone understands are, perfectly appropriate? They don't offend anybody. Somebody has a charitable, a Red Cross button, or, they've got think of the least offensive t-shirt we can come up with, Mother Teresa rules. Whatever you want to come up with, right? So they wear this and everyone's fine with it. And then somebody says, okay, well, I want to wear a Black Lives Matter button. I want to wear an LGBTQ hat, a rainbow logo or whatever. And then the employer gets interested, and then the employer says, nope, we have a policy. That's where the issues come up.
I think that's right. It's interesting because I've actually had some calls with questions even about sports teams. How about that? Right?
Really?
The Friday before the big Michigan State game, right? Employees creating conflict with each other by wearing what starts out as just a shirt with the block M, right? Yes. And turns into somebody else wearing a hat that says Spartans suck.
I have to tell a story about, Michigan went into Michigan State Stadium and Jeff Smoker threw a touchdown pass to TJ Duckett to beat the Wolverines. And one of my clients called me on Monday morning, distraught, like most successful people, a Michigan man. And he said to me, I have an employee who's wearing a Spartans hat. I've told them to take it off. They refuse. Can I fire them? That happened.
What was your answer, Nate?
That ties into what we're talking about today, because my answer is, well, you can.
He's at will.
Should you?
Are you really going to fire all Spartans? Yeah, that's exactly right. So yes, we can have policies, certainly. But to Nate's point, the realistic idea that you are going to have a workplace in which no employee expresses their personal opinion on anything is probably unrealistic, right? Once we understand that's the case, it's very difficult to draw the line. And I think Nate mentioned Black Lives Matter. And I can tell you, not surprisingly, in the last year, I've gotten so many phone calls specifically on that topic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And in that case, employers were balancing perhaps a policy or a general approach, neutral approach, right? We just don't want employees creating conflict, taking a stand, etc. But what in the world do I do about employees wearing BLM shirts, buttons, hats, whatever it is, taking a position on that issue? against the backdrop of perhaps number one, that person or that employer having perhaps published a statement saying they support that cause.
Right.
And also momentum on social media against certain known large employers. Starbucks is a great example, right? Trying to I think maybe Meyer had concerns that here in West Michigan in that space too, when they told employees they are not allowed to express that opinion, there was a lot of backlash.
Right. And that goes to just a classic discrimination situation, right? Why are you telling me I can't wear Black Lives Matter mask, remember when everyone was wearing masks, or button or shirt, but so-and-so can wear a Michigan jersey, or so-and-so can wear whatever it is, right? Support of something else, but you're only enforcing the policy, right, on this particular issue and on this particular side of the issue.
Sure. And then taken to the next step, which is, okay, so we allow the BLM mask, right? The next person saying, well, now I want to wear my, just wait for it, right? My Make America Great Again, my MAGA hat at work, right?
Yes.
And now
they didn't have masks.
And now what was once a neutral policy is out the window. So Nate, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and so I mean, I think that's a great transition into the non-legal considerations, right? Because I've had clients call saying, we didn't want to get involved in this. And so, we allowed employees to wear Black Lives Matter, or we supported it. So we allowed employees to wear Black Lives Matter hats or masks. And then we got White Lives Matter apparel. And then we got Blue Lives Matter apparel. And all of a sudden, we've got employees in all these camps, glaring at each other across battle lines. And it's the worst environment we can imagine. And so, it's a catch-22 for employers because, you can, and it's a catch-22, certainly depending on what type of business you're in, both for employees and customers. So, you can take a position and employees can, you'll alienate some of your employees who disagree with your position. And that causes ordinary employee relations issues. And it could even cause, staffing challenges, right? They might leave. You might have trouble hiring people because they associate you with a cause they don't believe in. And right now, I think you guys would probably agree that getting enough qualified people in the door is a top 2 or 3 concern for every business out there. So, I mean, that's not a small thing. Right. But if you do permit that expression, then you run the risk of a divided workplace. And, employers don't relish that environment either. Same thing with customers. Permit expression, you got customers turned off that you do. Prohibit it, you got customers boycotting you because you don't. So, it's a microcosm of the country right now, which, newsflash, is a little bit divided. And so, and Starbucks, you raised that a minute ago. I mean, that's a great example of, a company that has every legal resource under the sun, has, presumably a sophisticated HR function, has the ability to think through any decision they make, is, I'm sure, in the business of predicting adverse consequences. And they still sent an internal memo based on a dress code policy that, prohibited attire that advocated for, political or religious or personal issues. And BuzzFeed got a hold of that internal memo, published it, and Starbucks got so much negative PR that it ended up endorsing Black Lives Matter, donating $1 million to racial equity organizations and producing 250,000 BLM t-shirts itself and distributing them to its employees.
Certainly one approach, Nate, that I hear you saying is employers can toe the line here, right, for the most part, and say absolutely no political speech. We're not going to express ourselves in a way that takes sides. And if we really hold to that, then that is one option. Is there, Nate, I'm wondering though, you're our labor guy. Are there concerns with doing that, right? Are there lines that employers can't cross when they say employees are not allowed to express themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the National Labor Relations Act, which most people, of course, associate with unions and unionized employers, also protects employees at any private sector workplace, including, of course, non-union employees who want to engage in protected concerted activity. And, broadly speaking, that just means they want to band together for their own mutual aid and protection with respect to work issues. And so, at the end of the day, a lot of these political issues and social issues can cross over into direct work-related implications. So here's an easy example. Somebody says, vote for Biden. Okay, well, that's not protected by itself. And by the way, whether or not you have a policy or whether or not you're enforcing it, even, you can prohibit people who just want to support a Republican or a Democratic candidate or support the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, because that's not protected by law. Certainly not in Michigan. I don't think it's protected in any state. There are political protections in some states, but they relate primarily to voting and to conventions and so on. But set that all aside. In general, you can prohibit that. But what if somebody says, vote for Biden, he'll raise the minimum wage? Or what if you say, vote for Biden, he'll make union organizing easier, and that's what we need here? Then all of a sudden, what you're really doing is saying, that the candidate is just a vehicle for some work-related improvement that we think we need or want. And that's protected concerted activity that the employer cannot respond negatively to and can certainly not discipline or retaliate against an employee.
Good point. So if an employer is thinking about taking a broad position on prohibiting what I'll say controversial or political communications in the workplace, Nate, they're going to want an exception for that, right? For anything that's protected under the NLRA.
Yeah, I think everyone can remember back, 5 or 6 years when they were issuing so many disclaimers that, they felt like their entire handbook was just a disclaimer. And I think we might be headed back, toward that territory here again fairly soon. That's probably a topic for another podcast, but I do think making sure that your policies, clearly carve out, activity that's protected by law or activity that employees have, of course, the right to engage in is just good practice.
And regardless of the actual carve out 10 pages of caveats that we put at the beginning of handbooks because of that, that might be a good opportunity for an employer to stop and count to 10 before making a discipline or termination decision, right? To the extent that an employer does have a policy like this, and we just discuss the pros and cons. It's one thing to have a policy. It's another to actually enforce it to an employee's detriment. So before an employer does that, because of everything we've just discussed, it might be helpful to seek counsel or at least think through all the issues we just discussed here today.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, and think through them a little bit more carefully than Starbucks did, so that you don't have to reverse course full rudder.
They do make good beans, though.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
So let's pivot now to direct conflict between employees, and every HR staff's dream day when one employee comes in to complain about another.
Right.
Right. So regardless of a policy, regardless of a public stance an employer may have taken, an employee comes in and says, so-and-so has a sticker, right, pinned on their cubicle that's in plain sight, and it really bothers me, it offends me, it, et cetera, and I want you to have them take it down, right? Or maybe they said something that another person thought was insensitive, et cetera. When there's direct conflict between employees on controversial, sensitive issues, it can make HR people very uncomfortable.
Sure.
Right?
It's the human part of human resources that really, really make the job hard. Right?
If only we could take that part out.
If only it were just resources. So
oh, no, we've got to keep it in. That's every human resource professional's job security.
I know, right?
There.
Exactly.
Human nature.
And maybe a little bit of ours, too.
These human beings having to work together is what makes the job really hard. And to your point, yes. I mean, it's resolving conflict between employees is always a difficult challenge. When you throw in these highly charged issues, it makes it very hard. My observation too is a lot of HR folks are legitimately trying to, in good faith, resolve that conflict without inserting their own opinions, right? Which is important. Exactly. Trying to uphold to what they understand to be the company's, right, core values, right? And all at the same time, not get the organization into a hot mess, either from a legal standpoint or a PR standpoint. Boy, that is a tall order.
Yes, it is. It's not a good day, right, for that HR professional. So I wanted to bounce this off of you. And Nate, you're going to stay with us for a few more minutes, right?
I will do as I'm told.
Okay. Please stick around because I want your thoughts on this too. The way I approach these conversations with clients, Sarah, and I really want to know if how you approach them.
Sure.
My approach is to focus on the conduct and the behavior and try to separate out the belief of the employee. So I think of the belief as like a cartoon bubble, maybe, right, over someone's head. And I think of the conduct as the bubble coming out of their mouth, right, if we think to cartoons. So what's happening in the bubble, the thought bubble, is not our concern as an employer. And I think that's a difficult concept for some folks to get their heads around. But if you can almost visualize that when you're presented with a conflict like that, someone's political belief, religious belief, socioeconomic beliefs, whatever it is, we're just their employer.
Where they went to college,
we're
perhaps.
not the thought police, where they went to college. But as an employer, and to Nate's point, we do need to make sure we're talking about private employers here. We can, and we should be concerned about the conduct, right? The what comes out of the mouth, the what posters are, stickers are on the cubicle, etc. And depending on the employer's philosophy about these things, as we all just discussed for the previous 20 minutes, do what you need to do, but not get engaged in the belief system of the person you're talking with. What do you think about that?
Actually, I think that's a really interesting approach, and I like it, right? In other words, we don't discipline employees. We don't take adverse action against employees for what they believe.
Right.
Okay. But we may and do address situations when employees are engaging in misconduct, right? There's sometimes it's hard to draw that distinction when the allegation is that somebody's being offensive to me, right?
Yes.
Right? Well, are they being offensive to you because you just know their beliefs, or are they being offensive to you because they've actually engaged in behavior that is offensive?
Yes.
Right? And I think framing it that way is really important. The other thought I had as you were talking is, boy, for many workplaces, it would be amazingly helpful to communicate that concept to employees through diversity training, et cetera, right? This idea that people are allowed to believe what they want and think in their head what they want at work. However, we do expect you to treat each other with respect and dignity. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Nate?
I agree with that. I mean, to me, it's a little bit analogous to what I've heard the two of you say many times, and I've followed in my career about how to handle, employee medical issues.
Yeah.
Which is, we're not going to diagnose the reason why somebody is misbehaving or failing to meet a performance standard, or engaging in any other activity that doesn't meet expectation. We're not going to diagnose it. We're just going to manage the performance. And, we have the right to ask employees to be civil to one another, to treat one another with dignity, to show respect. And, if they don't do those things, then the basis for it, the reason for it, the thought bubble for it isn't our concern. The concern is what you did and the impact it had on a coworker, the impact it had on the workplace. And so, in general, I think that's absolutely right. It's not always easy, of course, in practice. It's not easy because people are going to be offended by things that, we may not, so if somebody has a display in their workstation that's, that reflects some belief that they have, that somebody else happens to see when they're walking by and decides is, a hostile work environment, that's where you have to decide, okay, well, did that person really actually do anything that we think was offensive? It's also a problem when people, some of these issues implicate religious beliefs. And of course, there, as we all know, we not only have non-discrimination obligations, we've got accommodation obligations. And so what about employees who take positions based on a religious belief against, say, sexual orientation or gender identity? That's probably another podcast also.
Wow.
But, sometimes there are additional considerations that you have to take into account as an employer.
Right.
But as a foundation, I think that's right. I think we have expectations for how people treat one another. We enforce those expectations, and we steer clear of, diagnosing motivations, just like we steer clear of diagnosing underlying health conditions.
That's a great analogy that I hadn't thought of. Right. That's great. The analogy to the medical conditions.
Yeah. And I think the takeaway here is that these are really challenging questions, and HR folks are juggling a lot of balls as they're trying to manage these conflict issues between employees in the workplace.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
Yes.
Thank you, Nate, for helping us think through these issues.
Thanks, Nate.
Yep. Hey, next time you need me, I'll be lurking.
Yeah, right. I'll remember that. Thanks.
Have a great day.
Yeah, have a great day. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.